talked last week about Rahab, the harlot, and how God could use anybody that'll just trust Him as as their Savior. Doesn't matter what your background is. Doesn't matter what you've done. There's such a difference between Rahab and that of Sarah. Both of them are in Hebrews chapter 11, with those God talking about the great faith that they had in God. And so the only limit you have of being used, and that's how much faith you have in God. And so background's not an excuse, as we see that of Rahab, who's known as a harlot. But then when she heard of them, and her heart melted within her, and she realized He was the true Lord, He was the true God. And she not only spared that of herself, but she spared that of her family. And from this time forward, you're going to see her being greatly used, marrying one of the military men that Joshua has, Solomon. And then they end up having Boaz. Boaz ends up with that of Ruth. And the lineage goes right on. Matthew chapter number 1. When it tells the lineage of Christ, it's got Rahab in the midst of that. And so it's not that God can't use you. He can use you. But it depends on you. So don't blame what you're going through. Don't blame what you've been through. Don't blame what your past is. In fact, if you compare the two, Sarah from the beginning went with Abraham to a land she did not know, and God was going to lead him and guide him. God gave her a deed that she thought could not be done in having a child, and she was past the age of childbearing. And so here she was. She came up with her own game plan of how they could do God's will, and Ishmael was born, and through that of her handmaid Hagar, and ended up being a thorn in the flesh to them. And God was faithful, that God did use her out of that seemed to be dead. God gave life. So don't get ahead of God. Don't get impatient on God, as Sarah did, and what it greatly costs them. Realize your time's not God's time. And some will tell you, well, it's past, it's over, it's too late. You listen to Him, and He's the one that gives the promises. And tonight I want to speak on that without excuse, because the big question comes, how could God go in? And He's fixing to go into the land of Canaan, and He's fixing to destroy some nations, 7 specifically. There was more than that when He talked to Moses, but there's some that He's going to destroy because of what they were. Not because Israel was so great and so faithful, but because of the sin that they were doing. And God's never changed when it comes to sin. God's never changed when it comes to what He thinks about sin. Calvary ought to tell us how much that God hates sin. And so don't think you're without excuse. Don't think just because we're a Christian we can live any way we want to. That's the big, adversary that people use for those that believe in security. The believer is that you can go and live any way you want to live. You can't live any way you want to live. There's still costs for sin, and sin always separates. And so to think that Paul cried out and said that he didn't want to be a castaway. He didn't want anything to be in his life where God put him on a shelf and didn't use him anymore because of his life. And so he made it plain. If you preach, don't steal, don't steal. If you preach, don't lie, don't lie. If you tell truth, a Bible truth to someone, live that Bible truth. It's easy to say. It's easy to say to be faithful, but are you faithful? It's easy to say keep your mind right, but are you keeping your mind right? And the things are easy to say, but different to do. And it takes with that of a surrender to that of the Savior of what we have. So here in chapter number 2, we see again really some great points that God puts out to us. But I want to go to Romans chapter 1 for just a second and write this for reference, if you would. It's not a new verse to us, but just to let us know that nobody's without excuse when it comes to that of our Savior. And look what he says in verse number 18 of that chapter 1. In fact, Paul says in 16, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it's the power of God unto salvation. To everyone that believeth, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith. As it is written, the just shall live by faith. His righteousness, not only saving faith, but living faith, everyday faith that we ought to have and put our trust in Him. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifested in them. For God Himself showed it unto them. For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even the eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish hearts were what? Was darkened. You know, it all starts out of, here's a key where it starts out. It starts out with that of being unthankful. You know, where you're unthankful for anything. You know, unthankful for everything. One time you may have been thankful, but then you quit being thankful for what you got. And then you get to where you're not thankful for it until you lose it. And then when you lose it, you realize, man, I had something and I didn't realize what I had. Maybe as a friend, maybe as a fellowship, whatever it might have been. But you don't realize really what it is. And here when it comes to God, he said even the invisible things, nature itself teaches us there's a God. And here's some that turned their back on him. It wasn't that God just all of a sudden said, I'm going to destroy these 7 nations from the land. He made it plain to Israel, I didn't pick you because you were more than any. I didn't pick you because you're more godly than any. I just picked you because I loved you. In fact, there were fewer. In fact, when they ended up going from Canaan, realized when they went from the land of, from that of Canaan, when they went from there to Egypt with Joseph, and Joseph called them over during the famine, there was only about 70 that went. That's all the size that they were. But God makes it pretty plain in these scriptures here. Let's read our text here, and then we'll get to a couple thoughts here this morning where they're without excuse. Chapter number 2 in Joshua, let's read through. He said, and Joshua the son of Nun sent out of Shittim 2 men to spy secretly, saying, go view the land, even Jericho. And they went and came into the harlot's house, named Rahab, and lodged there. And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, behold, there came men in thither tonight of the children of Israel to search out our country, to search out the country. And the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, bring forth the men that came in unto thee, which are entered into thine house, that they be come to search out all the country. And the woman took the 2 men and hid them, and said thus, there came men to me unto me, but I wish not whence they were. And it came to pass about the time of the shutting of the gate, when it was dark, that the men went out. Whether the men went, I wot not. Pursue after them quickly, for you shall overtake them. But she had brought them up into the roof of her house, and hid them in the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. And the men pursued after them the way of Jordan unto the fords. And as soon as they were pursued after them, were gone out, they shut the gates. And before they were laid down, she came up unto them upon the roof, and she said unto the men, I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. Listen what she's telling them. Listen what she's saying. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and when you did what you did unto the kings of the Amorites that were on the other side of Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our heart did melt. Neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and in the earth beneath. There's something she confesses to them. In fact, even when they go back in verse 23, they returned unto him and said this to Joshua in verse 24. They said, truly the Lord hath delivered into our hands all the land, for even the inhabitants of the country do faint because of us. Now notice the whole history of this story of what's going on. They're fixing to cross the Jordan River. They're fixing to go into the land of Canaan, which we've already recognized as the victorious Christian life. It's not heaven, because there's going to be battles, there's going to be nations, there's going to fight. But go back to where God even started this and first mentioned it to that of Abraham, when he made a covenant with Abram in Genesis chapter number 15. And look what God tells Abram here as he puts him in a deep sleep. And God walks into the midst of that. God could swear by no greater than that of himself. So he swore, he made a covenant with Abraham, and he was the one that swore by himself. Some swear by other names. There is no greater name, so he swore by that self. So it's God keeping a covenant with God. And God's going to make it plain all the way through time when Israel's going to turn their back on him, things that they're going to do. God says, nevertheless, because of the covenant I made, because of my word, because I promised. I'll not forget my covenant. He's always kept a remnant because we got a God that's a God of his word. He doesn't change. He's the same yesterday. He's the same today. He's the same forever. Our problem is we're changeable. And opportunity that they had, but they didn't take when it comes to these nations. Look what he says. And when the sun was going down, verse number 12, a deep sleep fell upon Abraham. And this is a covenant of blood suffering and death. He said, lo, the horror of a great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be strangers in a land that is not theirs. And they shall serve them, and they shall afflict them, how long? 400 years. He's telling Abraham, your people are going to go into a land that's not their land. They're strangers there. And they're going to afflict your people 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve I will judge afterwards, shall they come out with great substance, and they shall go to thy father in peace, and thou shalt be buried in a good old age. God's letting them know that, listen, here's what's going to happen in your future. It's just Abraham now. And he's letting him know here's what's going to happen. And they're going to go and be in another land for 400 years. And during that 400 years span, here's what's going to happen. And realize this, many will, and when they think, does it seem fair that God's sending them now across Jordan, and they're going to go across Jordan, and they're going to utterly destroy. Jericho is going to fall. It's going to collapse. Everybody's going to die in Jericho except one harlot woman and all of her family that's in her house. Everybody else dies. How could God do that? How could that be fair? How could that happen? To think how God gets the blame for a lot of things. How could he go in and just ravish these 7 nations they go in? And he takes them little by little, some of them that he's going to take little by little, and even let them battle some. And some of them they're not going to conquer. The Jebusites are still going to be there in David's day in Jerusalem, and David's going to have to be the one that takes care of them. But how could this happen? How could that be fair? So I want you to realize for just a second here, the same land that Israel came out of, the same land Joseph came out of, he was sent out of, the same land that here comes a famine, plenteous for 7 years. We went through it here from this pulpit with you. Here's the 7 years of plenteous. After the 7 years of plenteous was 7 years of what? Famine, horrible famine. So who all came to Egypt to get help? Everybody. In fact, Jacob left and his wagons left, and they came to Egypt to get help. And when they did, Pharaoh gave them the land of Goshen, and they're in the land of Goshen. They prospered, they grew, and he, just like Abraham said, they're going to be in a land that's not their land. They ended up in Egypt. Egypt's a type of what? Type of the world. But in that time, they became slaves in those days. They weren't in battle. They weren't in war with anybody. They grew and they grew and they multiplied. And now those that started out 70 after 420 years, now they're going to be in the millions. That we see that Moses is going to lead out over that of the Red Sea. But a couple things I want you to see here when it comes to that of time. Look what he says here in Exodus chapter number 12. This is when they come out of the land of Egypt. Exodus chapter number 12. And I know this is all review, but look what he says here. The 10 plagues have been, the last one's done here in chapter 12, where the firstborn is smitten in the land of Egypt. Once that happens, Pharaoh says in verse 31, he calls Moses and Aaron by night, rise up, get you forth among your people, both ye, your children, go and serve your God. He tried to make deals with him at first. He said, just you go, but don't take your children. And remember, Moses said, we can't do that. We got to take our children with us. He said, all right, you go take your kid, but don't take your flocks. He said, well, we're not going to serve God without a sacrifice. We're taking our children, we're taking our flocks, we're taking everything when we go. We're not leaving anything. And Pharaoh tried to get him to compromise a little bit. Okay, sir, but just ye that are men go. And we went through this time and time again, how he tried to wheel and deal with Moses about how he could go and be okay, but don't serve that. The whole key, Moses was saying, this is a God that the whole family is supposed to serve. And this is a God that the whole family is supposed to serve, and realize there's something we've got to offer God. We've got to give God. He wouldn't go without his animals because he said, I'm not going to serve God without sacrifice. It's cost something. Our life, our time. Our problem is, we don't even give our time to God. We don't have time to read the Bible. We don't have time to pray. I mean, we go with our life and we say, we're just so busy. You took time tonight to come to the house of God. That's great. I mean, it ought to be God's time. Why are we coming? Because there's a God that we love and a God that we serve and a God that we want to grow in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. How many years has it been since they've been in there? Verse 37. He said, and the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth. He says about 600,000 on foot that were men besides children. And he says, and the mixed multitude went also with them in flocks and herds, even very much cattle. And they baked unleavened cakes of dough, which they had brought forth out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not tarry. Neither had they prepared them for themselves any victuals. That word right there, you see it right there. Verse 40. And the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 400 and what? 30 years. So here's 430 years. He told Moses they were going to be, he told Abraham that here they were going to be, as they were treated in that of bondage of what they were going to be. He made it plain they would be afflicted for 400 years, but now they're here 430 years. Remember, Joseph was there, and Joseph served when he came over. Joseph was the second highest in command, and then Joseph died. And then they purposed in their heart, what's going to happen to these because they're multiplying so fast, and fear came. So they put him to the taskmaster, and that's exactly what they did. So here's 430 years. So what's happening over in the land of Canaan? What's going to happen over in the promised land for those 430 years? What chance did those other nations have to know about God or turn their heart over to God? They get over across the Red Sea. They're across the Red Sea before they go into the Jordan. God takes a whole generation away because of unbelief. So here's 40 more years were added to that 430 years that this nation gets word of some things. How do you know they got word? Because they go to Jericho, and what's the first thing Rahab says to them? We heard of you, and we heard about your God, and it made our hearts melt. We knew that your God is the God of all the world. We knew that he is. It's amazing the word that went out and the word that spread, and it wasn't that they didn't have a chance to come to him, but the problem was they wouldn't come to him. And the only one that would come to him was Rahab. You'd think out of a whole city, surely there would be more to believe than just Rahab when they got word of this and when they heard of this. But there wasn't. Imagine, you're not left out. It's not that God's leaving you out of anything. It's choices you make. It's things that you decide. It's your time of what you decide to do, whether to serve him or not to serve him. Whether to be a last minute, here I go, and I'm going to serve him and think a little bit about him, or is he going to be our life? Is he going to be our everything? Are we going to let the past ruin the future? Here they didn't have just all of a sudden God go in and wipe out these nations. These nations had at least 470 years that they had an opportunity. 470 years that word had to come. Hey, let's go to Egypt. Why? Joseph's there. What's so good about Joseph? I don't know. His God gave him some wisdom, and the wisdom that his God gave him, man, he's not only given us grain for everything we got, the riches that Pharaoh got and the land that increased for Pharaoh, because how he managed that of what he had, being second in command, was amazing. And then to think as they saw that, and he gives God the credit for everything, and everybody that met Joseph knew about his God, and everybody that met Joseph, even whether it was in the prison, whether it was here when it comes to that in front of Pharaoh, everybody knew there was something different about Joseph and that he found favor in the eyes of his Lord. He put God first. You want to talk about a man that could have got bitter because of his past. One that could have had problems with his family because of the past. One that could have got mad and spent the rest of his life against Potiphar's wife because she lied about, of all things, his morality. When someone lies about your integrity and bears false witness about your morality, when here's a clean as clean could be when it comes to him, how faithful that he was and to be lied at. He could have spent the rest of his life attacking those that attacked him, but he didn't. He kept his eyes on God. And what did God do? Now we've got a nation now that when they go in, we heard about your God. We heard about the Red Sea. We heard about what he did. We heard about what happened to Pharaoh's army. We heard all of that. The word spread, and they got word of all of that. Sure, what happened with Amalek and that crew, all of those of what took place. And she said, We all melded. Our hearts melded within us. All of them have melded. Man, what a fear, because their God's such a great God. And then what he did on the other side with the other kings of Zog and that of Sihon and those that he beat. And they're thinking, what can we do against him? But what she did is she chose to trust in him. And because she did, here she is in chapter 11 of Hebrews in the faith aisle. And because she's in the hall of faith, how God used a harlot from a city that didn't believe, was in idolatry, don't know how she was raised, don't know what her life was like except what God puts here. But we see a big change of one that not tearing down a life, but now building a life. And not only was she saved, but her whole family was saved. I'm sure everybody in their family thought they were sure glad that they had Rahab in their kinfolk. Sure glad Rahab was my daughter. Sure glad Rahab was my sister. All those that got spared because of Rahab and what she did, I'm sure they were sure glad because of Rahab. They may not have thought that because of her lifestyle years before, but because of what she put her trust in and her faith in, it gave all of them hope. And listen, I don't know what your past might have been. I don't know what others might have thought of you in the past. But what you do now makes all the difference in the world, what we do with people and how we reach them for his honor and his glory. It wasn't that they didn't have an opportunity. They did have an opportunity. And many even now say, what about nations that never heard about God? What about ones we got right now here with all the billions that we have on planet Earth that's never heard about him? Is God being fair? Paul said this. He says he was free from the blood of all men. What would happen tonight if you just quit? You got out of church. You decided, I'm done. I'm out of here. What's going to happen to your kids? And then what's going to happen to your grandkids? And then what's going to happen to your grandkids, because now they may not know nothing about God or anything about him. And it all starts with us. That's why God puts household salvation. That's why God puts on dads in Deuteronomy chapter number 6 that we're to talk about him at home. It's our responsibility to win our kids. And if I'm the one that turns my back and puts my life in something else or puts some other God in my family, and he's not the main thing to me, how's he going to be the main thing to my kids? It's not that they couldn't have, they could. And that was showed with Rahab the harlot. With you and I, we got choices that we make. You know, we say how much we want to love God, but look at your time schedule. How much do we even search after God? And do we search after him with all of our heart? God says, blessed is he that hungers and thirsts for righteousness, for he shall be what? He shall be filled. And only you know how much you think about him during the day. Only you know when you face something, do you thank him? Or do you think about him? Do you call on him? Do you ask for wisdom? Only you know what he really is in your life, because nobody else can tell really what he is in your life. Some things ought to show on the outside, but we're pretty good actors sometimes. Religion has a good act and acts pretty biased, but it's not a religion that makes the difference. A fellow the other night, well, it was just last night at the jail, was talking to me about that, and I said, you know, the key is it's a relationship. It changes everything. It takes away the discouragement when you're by yourself. It takes away the loneliness when you're by yourself. It gives you wisdom when nobody else is around. It's the one that helps you with your speech and helps you with your thinking, to where your mind thinks one thing, and before your emotions kick in to think something else, you realize this isn't right. There's an enemy that's trying to twist me to make my actions be a way that it shouldn't be. If it's not pleasing to him, whatsoever we do in word and deed, we're to do all to the glory of God. I'm not just supposed to do it in what I do physically with my deeds, but my words are supposed to be right. And not my words, but he says, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight. Even what I'm thinking to be all right. How many times we may say something that's critical or ugly or cutting or judgmental, and we just go through it and think that it's okay. And here's a God that hears all of that. And to think he's the one that we ought to please with everything we got. It wasn't that they didn't have a chance. They had a chance. How long does it take? How long should God give them? And how long should God give you and I? Do you think 430 years is enough chance that maybe you have an opportunity to make a decision? How long are you going to wait? And then add 40 years to that when they get word that's dogmatic in everything that's happening now so close to them. And now they get word of everything that God's doing and how he's providing for them and taking care of them and winning battles for them and crossing the Red Sea, and the greatest army on the face of the earth is drowned in the water. And now here God brings them through on dry ground, and now they're at the doorpost. Now they're here. Now even 2 kings on the other side of Jordan. They've conquered with ease. And to think now they're knocking on our door. How long does it take? How many chances has God got to give you and I? And then for some say, well, God's so unjust. It's just a mean book. God just kills innocent people. There's results for choices we make. Do you think if a dad makes a decision, do you think it affects his kids? Yes, no? Absolutely. The way they think. That's why I said to bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. It's me that's teaching them. It's you and I that's teaching them what anger is, what compassion is, what love is, what bitterness is. What some do some things and they have no idea that it's wrong because that's the way they're taught. You know, I drove a bus for 15 years, and some of those kids, when I'd say, "Hey, what'd you say?" and they'd just blurt it right back out to me. No embarrassment, no blush. It was something common they hear all the time. They didn't even know that it was something that shouldn't be said. They didn't even know that it was rude. They had no idea because of what they've been taught. Some's paradigm and what they're taught, and we get on to, man, if that was my kid, I'd tell you what I'd do. Maybe nobody's ever told them. Nobody's had compassion enough to help them out a little bit. And maybe nobody taught the parent before them, or maybe one parent before them got mad at church and got out, and then they don't want anything to do with church because what was taught them. We've got illustration of that in the Bible, that when Uzziah died of leprosy, then his son didn't have anything to do with the house of God. And then when it comes, his other son that comes up, Ahab shut up the temple and wouldn't have anything to do with it. For 16 years, it was closed. Why? Because of what happened to his dad and what happened to his grandpa. You know, God help us. Let God be everything. When battles come in our life, they're to grow us. They're not to break us. They're not to kick us to the curb. Do we have a God that's just and faithful, or do we not? How long should God give us? How long are we patient with people? I mean, we throw people away a lot quicker than God does. God's long-suffering, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Is God just? Is God faithful in his dealings? And the truth is, he always is. He doesn't think like we think. His ways not our ways. We're the ones that's not just. We're the ones that don't balance it right. God's always just in what he did. He does. And thank God that he does. Is he fair? Yeah. How long should he give us? How many chances should we get before God makes us a castaway, sets us aside, puts us on a shelf? How long should he try to clean us up because there's some sin in our life? How long is he going to put up with hypocrisy in our life? I'm glad we got a God that loves us. I'm glad we're justified by faith. I'm glad in the day we live by grace. I'm so thankful that he sees Christ when he sees us. We're not justified by ourselves. We're justified by that of Christ. Me and Miss Wanda heard a debate the other day. It was some Muslims, some Jews, and Christians that were debating. And the Jews made the statement that, you know, Jesus was a good man, but they follow that of Moses, and they do their best to build their own righteousness. And I turned to chapter number 10 to Miss Wanda in the book of Romans, and it said, listen, they got a zeal for righteousness, but not the righteousness of God. It was their own righteousness. It was all about themselves. The only help we got is because we've got his righteousness. He imparts it to us, and then he imputes it to us so we can do what we ought to do on the outside. Everything we do is because of him. None of it's because of us. And he's the one we got to depend. He's the one we got to depend on. I love what Paul said, Christ who is our life. We can't live without him. Songwriter wrote it right. Lord, I can't even walk without you holding my hand. But how much do you let him do in your life? And how much by faith, depending on him, we can do this. We can get through this. God will give us wisdom for this. Don't discourage. Here they had 430 plus 40, 470 years. How much time should God give? And how much time has he given you and I? What do we do with our time? How about you tonight? Here's one when she heard word, her heart fainted. By her past, you'd think, there ain't no way God can use her. And here, because of her whole family gets saved. Hey, don't limit yourself to what God can do with you. Don't say, well, I'm not like someone else. Listen, it's God that does it. It's not you and I. It's you and I that just surrender to him and be available that God can use us for his honor and for his glory. How about you tonight? We are without excuse. And we're surely without excuse in our day. Why we don't serve him the best that we possibly can for his honor and for his glory. Every head bowed, every eye closed for just a minute tonight. How about you?